Good morning, YouTube. This is Kelsey from Kels Reads Things, also known as Librarians Recommend at Anna Porter Public Library. And I am here to discuss with you A Dress for the Wicked by Autumn Cross. Now, this is a debut novel. This is the first book that Autumn Cross has ever written, and I was beyond impressed, exceptionally, incredibly, irrevocably impressed. This is an incredible young adult novel about overcoming your circumstances, facing your inner demons, creative expression, dealing with sabotage and not knowing necessarily who to trust, and also just empathy. There was a lot of empathy expressed in this novel and quite a bit of foreshadowing as well. I highly recommend it for any age reader, honestly. It was very much a PG book. There was very little offensive language. There was no adult content necessarily, but the way the book is written would probably attract nearly any audience. So I give A Dress for the Wicked by Autumn Cross a 5-star rating. And it takes a lot for me to give a book a 5-star rating. Normally my criteria is it needs to grip me practically the whole time. I need to enjoy the characters. The writing style needs to be well done and elegant. I really enjoy a book that has good pacing, and overall the storyline needs to be interesting and intriguing, as well as the dialogue between characters. Honestly, Autumn Cross, you kicked it out of the park. It was just, this was an incredible book, and I highly recommend it, as I said before, for all readers. Okay, now that I have gushed and gushed about this book, I would like to actually discuss the plot. So, A Dress for the Wicked is a historical fiction novel about a young woman named Emmeline Watkins. She goes by Emmy, and she's from a small town known as Shy. But her dream is to move to the city and work at what's known as the fashion house. Now, the fashion house is basically a huge means for the city to thrive, so to speak. It's very much their biggest commercial availability for the people. I believe the city was called Avon upon Kint. Excuse me, Autumn Cross, if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. But anyway, Emmy is wanting to work for the fashion house, and every year the owner and operator, known as Madame Jolene, seeks out usually about 5 talented contestants to compete in this fashion challenge, so to speak. But she's being forced by Parliament in this world to select a country contestant for the first time in order to be more inclusive. Now, Madame Jolene, as you can imagine, is very much against this. She was an interesting character. She is definitely the villain in the story. She reminded me a little bit of Meryl Streep's character from what was that movie? The Devil Wears Prada. Sorry. If you've never seen The Devil Wears Prada, I highly recommend it, if only for the fact that Meryl Streep is one of the main characters in that movie. Excellent movie. But she reminded me quite a bit of Meryl Streep's character. She's arrogant, insanely brilliant, though, especially in a creative context. She normally knows what the client wants, even if the client doesn't know. And she's extremely driven and individualistic, and she obviously does not agree with Parliament's push to be more inclusive, and also she believes that it's intrusive. And in a way, of course it is. This is her own business, and it's kind of being run as if it's a political token. So it's very interesting. That was something else I loved about this book, is there was a lot of political struggle between the Crown, which supported the fashion house, and Madame Jolene, and Parliament, which is kind of a new pool of power. They're trying to be definitely more inclusive and progressive, and I believe the time period is probably the 1800s ish, maybe the early 1900s. It's never, I don't believe it's ever actually mentioned. But you definitely get a feel for that in this novel, and during that time there was a lot of political shifting, and that's definitely reflected in this novel. So excellent job, Autumn Cross. Very, very good job. She also has an Instagram. I can't at the top of my head remember what the username is, but I will be glad to include it in the bio after I upload this video. So keep a lookout for that. She's very entertaining on Instagram, and very, very polite and sweet. She's been nothing but kind in my posts. So thank you, Autumn. You're wonderful. Anyway, going back to the story. So there's a lot of political struggle in this book, which was extremely well done and very, very smart. Just incredibly smart. And Emmy is kind of caught in the middle between wanting to please Madame Jolene, as well as kind of stand up for herself and go out on her own. That was something I absolutely loved about Emmy's character from more or less from the very beginning. She was extremely independent and strong. It's almost like she was a reflection of Madame Jolene, maybe even a younger version of her. And Emmy has to prove to Madame Jolene throughout this entire experience that she belongs at Fashion House. But we come to learn maybe that's not where she belongs. And Emmy starts to question that herself. She starts to question her own desires and her own goals. And obviously she does get selected by Madame Jolene. She becomes part of the competition, but she runs into more or less being a part of the political scheme. She ends up being the press monkey, I believe she called herself, where Madame Jolene had her go and do interviews at all of these extravagant and well-known newspapers, and she has less time to prepare for her pieces and for the competition than the other like 4 or 5 ladies that there is, and all of them except for maybe 1 or 2 really doubt Emmy and treat her as though she doesn't belong. There are a lot of things that happen to Emmy during the course of this competition, and it's about a month and a half to 2 months long, where certain things occur, such as sabotage and ruining of her design, so to speak. So she knows that someone is out to get her. So that's another element that I really enjoyed, is you didn't know exactly who to trust, and I questioned myself multiple times on who to trust, especially in terms of the friendships that Emmy made. You couldn't really I couldn't tell, at least, whether the friendliness was fake, a facade. I mean, it was just a fantastic read. I loved it, and the way it ended, you can definitely tell that there's probably going to be more to come, and I very much look forward to that. So let me just give you a couple of quotes that I felt like really pushed the theme of the book forward. That was another thing that I really loved about this book, is throughout it you can see Emmy transform from this suspicious, doubtful young woman to someone who can really hold her own. And even from the beginning, Emmy was strong. She, at one point, when Madame Jolene just kind of dismisses her, marches right back up into that tent and says, I want you to look at this design. I belong at Fashion House. I have the talent and the drive and the love for it. And Madame Jolene gives her that chance. So again, Emmy was an incredible character. All the characters were extremely well fleshed out. It was just a wonderful read. Okay, so to give you just a couple of quotes that I really enjoyed, for instance, here's one after Emmy went through her first challenge, which did not, as you can imagine, go over super well. And this is her inner dialogue. Last time I panicked. I panicked so badly that I drowned out the sound of my own voice and made something I wasn't proud of. I wouldn't do that again. So I really appreciated that about Emmy. More or less she could own up to her own mistakes, and she held herself accountable for all the things really that happened to her and her reactions to them. She was determined to rise above all of these challenges. So that was something that I just was very impressed with in terms of Emmy's character, especially. Okay. And this is a quote about Emmy is more or less, as I said before, kind of used as a pawn in terms of politics. Madame Jolene is trying to show that the fashion house is more inclusive by allowing Emmy to compete, but again, she's forcing her to do all of these interviews and attend all these events and things rather than having more time, or at least the same amount of time as the other competitors, to complete her pieces and go to the next challenge. So she also forces Emmy to wear all of these big pink dresses, very kind of country looking, and honestly, it's not Emmy's style, but it's something that she has to deal with. So this quote is about a gown that she was forced to wear by Madame Jolene. So the gown was beautiful, of course. Everything Madame Jolene made was beautiful. But I'd slowly come to realize that the things she made were stunning illusions. There was no truth behind them. I thought that was extremely well put. Just in general, the way this book was written was beautiful. I have to say that was probably one of my favorite elements of this book alone, was just the way it was written, the foreshadowing, the somewhat subtle poetic language. It didn't take over the book. For instance, the very first book I reviewed for you all was Winterwood by Aaron Shaw, and I gave it a lower review because I thought that the poetic nature of the book didn't really, it was almost too much, if that makes sense, but the way that Autumn Cross wrote, it was just the perfect amount of poetic theme as well as with a modern means of writing. So it was just excellent. Excellent. Okay. And this is a quote about from Emmy. It's again her. This actually isn't her inner monologue. This is her talking to one of the competitors who, obviously, they're all pretty judgmental of Emmy. They all have better education. They've all been exposed to the city and the ways of fashion longer than Emmy has. And Emmy is talking about being in the spotlight, so to speak, at this point, and all the other girls are obviously jealous. So she stands up for herself by saying, "Do you think I want this?" My voice bounced off the high ceilings of the sewing room. To be treated like a press puppet when all I want to be is a designer. Emmy stands up for herself multiple times, even though she has little to no experience working with other young women. She originally is, like I said, from Shy, and her mother owns a small pub. So she grew up pouring beer for people and not necessarily being around things that are extravagant or on the fashion house level. And again, this is one of the biggest means of funding for the city, is the fashion house. It is fashion. It is a means of survival, so to speak, for this city. So fashion is kind of a big deal in this world. Okay, and one more quote I'd like to give you. It's from Sophie, who ends up, she's one of those characters you don't really know who to trust, and I don't want to give a whole lot away about Sophie specifically because her character grows quite a bit as well, but she is this mysterious woman. She wears all black all the time. She has black hair. She's one of those people you just don't know whose side she's on. Obviously, all of these young women are on their own sides. So it's interesting, though. She has a really interesting conversation with Emmy, and this is the quote. Sometimes the demons in your head are so strong that you don't know how to fight the ones in real life. And that quote was very powerful for me, especially as having been someone who has struggled with social anxiety before in the past, who struggled with bullying. I think nearly every United States American at one point has either struggled with one or two or both of these things. So in general, I thought that that was a fantastic quote, especially to mention. Just in general, all of these characters were extremely well thought out. They were just extremely well done. So again, I gave A Dress for the Wicked 5 stars. A wonderful read, exceptionally well written, fleshed out characters, intriguing storyline, and it's just one of those books that grips you and you can't put it down. You want to know what's going to happen next. Alright, guys, that's all I have today for A Dress for the Wicked by Autumn Cross. And starting next week, I will be reading book number 4 of the Throne of Glass series, Queen of Shadows. Thank you for watching, guys. I look forward to discussing more books with you in the future. Have a wonderful Thursday.